Welcome to the Hair of the Dog podcast. I'm Nicole Begley, and today we are talking with my dear friend Charlotte Reeves all about gear. We're talking about what gear you might want to start with, what gear to get if you're just getting started and you're trying to save some money, mirrorless versus DSLR, and a lot of our experiences with our new Canon R5. So stay tuned. It's a good one.
Welcome to the Hair of the Dog podcast. If you're a pet photographer ready to make more money and start living a life by your design, you've come to the right place. And now, your host, pet photographer, travel addict, chocolate martini connoisseur, Nicole Begley.
Hey everybody, Nicole here from Hair of the Dog, and I have back one of our favorite guests, my good friend Charlotte Reeves from Charlotte Reeves Photography and Learn Pet Photography down under in Brisbane, Australia. Welcome back to the podcast, Charlotte.
Thank you so much, Nicole. I'm so happy to be here and have another little chat with you. It's always heaps of fun.
Yes, I know. Yeah, we started off with, a good 15 minutes of our just normal random chat, which we spared you guys from that. But now we'll talk photography.
Yeah,
First, it was sharing dogs, which is not fun on a podcast because you can't really see them. If you guys want to hear Charlotte on one of our previous episodes that we had, definitely check out podcast episode number 17. Location scouting is what we talked about in that episode. So definitely worth a listen. That was a great conversation too. But today, we're going to be talking all about photography toys, all the gear.
Yay. All the gear. That's fun stuff to talk about.
It is. But before we get into that, Charlotte, why don't you give everybody just a quick background on you and where you're from in case they aren't familiar with you.
Cool. Okay. Well, I'm a dog photographer. I live in Brisbane, Australia. I've been doing it for about, I'm coming into my 14th year this year, which is amazing. So I specialize in dogs. I say I'm a pet photographer, but it's pretty much all about the dogs. So I have been teaching pet photography since 2013, and I have a dedicated website for that called Learn Pet Photography. I've got courses and ebooks and all that sort of thing. So if you wanted to check that out, that's at learnpetphotography.com. I guess that's sort of kind of it. I do a regular critique corner in Nicole's Hair of the Dog Academy. I'm also a coach in the Elevate program, and I just really love connecting with people live online during Critique Corner because it's just a great way of giving people like instant feedback on their work. So that's heaps of fun. And so you may have seen me from there if you're a member of the Hair of the Dog Academy. If not, I guess I'll see you around in the other groups that Nicole has, so the podcast group. And hope to see you soon.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, getting critique from your work, I think, is definitely one of the fastest ways to improve. And, a lot of times we start off and maybe friends and family are like, oh, that's a great image. But if you really want to improve, if you start to get critique from actual professionals, coaches and mentors, oh my gosh, you're just going to improve so fast. And really, if you're going to post in like big crazy groups for critique, you got to take it with a grain of salt because some people know what they're doing and some people maybe don't offer the best critique, or, they might not offer a critique in a critiquable manner. It might just be in
a kind manner sometimes either. Sometimes people can be a little bit harsh.
Yeah. So if you're looking for critique on your images, definitely check out the Academy, and Charlotte will hook you up in the critique corner. It's definitely one of the favorite little spots. But enough about that. Let's talk about some gear. Charlotte, you are a Canon girl, just like me.
Have
you always shot Canon?
Pretty much. So I started out in photography on film cameras. So I used to have a Pentax K1000. That was my very first camera, and then I had another couple of Pentax film cameras. But my first digital SLR was a Canon 350D, and I've pretty much had Canon ever since. So I've had the 350D, 5D Mark II, 1DX, 1DX Mark II, and now the R5. So that's basically my Canon history. I have dallied around with a Fuji, so a XT3, which I know you have as well, actually, Nicole.
I did. I ended up selling it because I thought I would use it for – I originally got it to, just kind of play with it. I didn't think it would totally replace my Canon gear, but I was like, well, maybe, but I really got it to record videos. And then I was thinking I would use it a lot for just personal stuff of like when I travel with my family and things like that. But then I discovered I still don't want to carry any gear with me when I get travel. So I just use my phone. So I'm like, okay,
exactly.
This needs to go.
I must say that's kind of pretty much the same thought process that I had. I was initially hoping the X-T3 could be a replacement for my Canon gear because I really liked the idea of a more compact kit and a lighter kit and all that kind of thing. But there are a few little things that it fell short on that I wasn't super happy with as being a replacement for my Canon gear.
Yeah.
So my next idea was then to use it for video and also to use it for personal stuff. And like you, I came to the conclusion I was happy just using my phone. So I ended up selling the Fuji stuff. So that was a brief little foray, I guess, that we both had into that little world that didn't quite work out, I guess.
Yeah. Yeah. And the Fuji was great. I mean, if it was a different situation, if I wasn't looking to replace like, high end Canon gear, I think it might have been a little bit different. I actually know a couple wedding photographers that Fuji X-T3 and now the X-T4 is their main camera and they love it. Yeah. So, it is still a great little camera. And it can be a professional level camera. Charlotte and I have just ridiculously high standards and have gotten really addicted to our Canon color and everything else.
That's true. Yeah. I found the Fuji had pretty good color. I was quite happy with the color. I was thinking about switching to Sony at one stage and the colors just didn't suit me. So I was pretty happy with the Fuji color. It was more so, I think the biggest thing for me was the fact that it was a crop factor camera, the crop factor sensor. And I just wasn't getting that because I always shoot at very shallow depth of field. That's part of my style. And I just felt like I wasn't getting that same beautiful shallow depth of field that I was able to get. So that was one of the big things. And also the other thing was the files looked a little bit funny in Lightroom. I don't know if you noticed that, Nicole, but I did play around with Capture One as a software. And the files definitely look better in Capture One, but I've been using Lightroom for a really long time and I was not keen on switching just because I switched the camera. So I figured that unless Lightroom sort of brought out some sort of proper support for the Fuji files, which I feel they didn't have at that stage. Yeah. It just wasn't going to fit into the way that I work, my workflow and I guess my high standards.
Yeah. We are control enthusiasts, I like to say.
Yes. That's one way to describe it.
Yes, for sure. Well, yeah, you and I both have started to move over to the R5 for Canon. And yeah, you and Craig had it first because it was back ordered here in the States. So you guys had a good couple months head start on me. But I couldn't wait to get my hands on it. And so far it has not disappointed. I've really enjoyed it. I haven't quite bit the bullet to sell my 1DX yet, but I think I'm getting pretty darn close.
Yeah. Well, I have actually completely transitioned now. Yeah. So I sold my 1DX. I sold all of my EF lenses. I now have only RF lenses and the R5. So I currently have a camera body and 3 RF lenses, and that's it. Nice.
And you have it all covered, and you love it.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. No, I kept 2 lenses that I really liked to start with because I thought I'll just use them with the adapter because I had the adapter as well, of course. Yep. And so that was the 35 f1.4, which is a lens that I love so much. I absolutely adore that lens. And also the 135 f2 prime. I love that lens as well. So I kept those 2 to start with. But I found in practical real life usage of the system, using the adapter and switching between RF lenses and EF lenses with the adapter was just a bit clunky during a photo session. It just seemed I would seem to be spending so much time in my camera bag, taking the adapter off and putting it on and then taking it all off and putting an RF lens on and then switching the adapter to the other lens. And it just kind of interrupted my flow, I suppose. So I just sort of made the decision that I was going to just switch to all RF lenses, which I'm really happy about because they're amazing, the RF lenses. I think that's one of the big things about the new Canon Mirrorless series is that I think they're putting all the development into the new RF lenses. I'm not sure that they're putting a lot of development into the EF lenses anymore because everything is switching and slowly moving towards the mirrorless side of things. So a lot of the new lenses that are coming out are RF lenses and they're amazing. They're really, really amazing.
amazed because I don't have any RF lenses yet. I got the R5 and the adapter, and I'm amazed that my EF lenses
they work amazing.
Sharper on my R5 files than they did for my 1DX.
Yep.
It's amazing. Even my 85 1.2, which I was going to sell ages ago because I'd never really used it. It's beautiful for people, but I always found it slightly slow to focus for dogs. So it made me kind of crazy. And even that was focused a little bit faster, and gosh, the images from that are just beautiful. So I have been so pleasantly surprised. But I'm sure, over the next year, I probably will end up selling that 1DX and all those EF lenses and go full on into the RF world, which I found the adapter not too much of a problem because they were all. So I just leave the adapter on my camera. Yeah. So using all EF lenses, pretty easy. Yeah.
It's when you've got the mix of the RF and the EF lenses that I found was a bit problematic, I suppose. And I actually found the same thing. So my 35 and my 135 both worked beautifully with the adapter, like really, really nice. Beautiful. I mean, the 35 is amazing regardless. Right. But the 135 could sometimes be a little bit off with focus or a little bit slow on the 1DX, but on the RF, on the R5 with the adapter, it was even better. It's amazing. Wow. Yeah. So definitely a viable thing to just get the adapter and just use your EF lenses. I mean, there's absolutely no problem with that.
I've talked to a lot of people that have been thinking about going mirrorless, and I've been telling every single Canon shooter that if they wanted to go mirrorless, because they're like, oh, maybe I should do Sony, maybe I should do Fuji. I'm like, no. If you're already Canon, just stay R5. This podcast is not sponsored by Canon, but
you would think that it was the way we're talking. Hey, there's an idea. Maybe we can do that.
If you're listening, we love the R5. So I want to just kind of backtrack for a little bit here and maybe talk a little bit to the people that are maybe earlier in their photographic journey, and they're like, man, I'm loving photographing some dogs. Maybe they have just been using a phone or a little point and shoot or a, consumer level camera, and they're like, I want to get more into this. Number one, what would you recommend that they spend the money on first? Bodies or lenses, or just like, how do you get started? Because, it's sometimes hard to look and be like, oh my gosh, I've got to spend $5,000 to get like a body and a couple lenses. Holy cow.
Yeah, I guess, there's that whole thing of whether you go for a crop sensor or a full frame to start with as well. Yeah. That's the other question. So I guess if you don't have a camera at all and you're buying your first camera and you're wanting to do pet photography, I do think that you need to have a camera body that has a fairly decent autofocus system. Mm-hmm. Because dogs are not easy to photograph to start with because they're small and they're fast moving and they're random. And especially if you want to shoot action, you will find yourself a little bit held back if you have a more entry-level camera that doesn't have as many focus points or doesn't do as many frames per second. So I think lack of a good autofocus system is something that can hold you back at the start. So I would recommend getting a body, even if it's a crop sensor, like body. I think I've been seeing quite a few people using, I think it's the 90s, the 90D.
I don't know that one. I know the 7D. That was my first camera for my, once I started my business, it was the 7D, and it was like mainly for sports photography. It was a crop sensor. And when I started on crop, I didn't mind it because I didn't know any different. Yeah. But after I found the same thing when I went Fuji that was cropped, I was now so used to shooting on a full frame, like just knowing how far to be away from my subject, and, how much background I'm going to get, and going back to crop after that was challenging. Yeah,
it's just a bit strange.
Starting on it wasn't a problem at all.
Yeah. I think it's fine to start on a crop sensor camera as long as the lenses that you're buying will also fit the full frame as well when you do upgrade, because you probably will upgrade at some stage. I think sometimes the trap people fall into is they think that they need to get full frame right from the very start. So they go with a real entry-level full frame camera, which unfortunately I'm not sure about the Nikon side of things or Sony or whatever, but with Canon, the entry-level full frame is the 6D, which is a camera that I don't think is good for pet photographers, mainly because, especially the earlier ones, I think there's a 60 and then a 60 Mark II, but mainly the first one, it does not have a great autofocus system. It's full frame, which is awesome, but it's got a very small group of focus points right in the center. And it also doesn't have any frames per second, and it's just not the best. So just because it's full frame doesn't mean it's going to be better.
Yeah.
Specifically for pet photography, I would go a 7D over a 6D any day because it's got a better autofocus system. And I think that's more important when it comes to photographing pets.
I agree. I know I noticed a huge difference even upgrading for because I had a 7D originally, and then I went to 5D Mark II or III. I forget which one I had. 5.3. I think it was 5D Mark III. And then, because that is 4 now. So I had 5D Mark III, and then I upgraded to the 1DX and the 1DX Mark II, and it was night and day. I was like, how did I ever get any of these action photos in focus before on my 5D? Because mostly the focus system was fairly good, but the frames per second was like nothing compared to the 1DX. So to all of you guys out there that are like, man, my action photos are so hard, I only get the good ones here and there. Until you get often like the 1DX or the R5 or something that has like incredible frame per second and really good autofocus, they are hit or miss. And even then, I mean, I still miss sometimes. I'm sure you do once in a blue moon too.
Of course, more often you'd think, though. Definitely. I mean, you do. I guess like it's really easy to see all these amazing action photos of dogs and sort of think, oh, I should be able to do that with my camera if it's like an entry level sort of camera. And it's sometimes it's actually just not possible.
Right. You have to get really lucky.
You can definitely increase your chances of getting awesome action photos if you pay attention to other things, such as, the lighting and your position and the way that you shoot and lots of practice, of course. So you can increase your chances of getting great action shots and make it easier for your camera if your camera is not quite up to scratch in that area. Yeah. But it sort of gets to a point where you really just do need some better, features on your camera, I guess, to be able to capture those sorts of shots.
Yeah.
Having said that, you don't need a 1DX. You don't even need a 5D. I've seen some amazing action photos on like a 7D, and I'm pretty sure it's the 90. Is it 90D or 80D or something like that on the Canon?
I don't know that one.
That actually has a really good autofocus system.
Yeah.
I was looking into it the other day because someone asked me a question of like, should I get the 7D or I'm pretty sure it's a 90D, and they've got pretty much the same autofocus system. It's crazy. They're putting amazing autofocus system in like a more entry level sort of prosumer sort of style camera. So that could be a really good option for people getting into it. So the other thing that you asked about before, just backtracking a little bit, was lenses. And should you invest your money in lenses or the camera body? I think once you've got the camera body sorted, then you need to turn to lenses. Generally, and I would recommend buying a camera body without a kit lens. So buy just the body, because kit lenses are generally not good. So they're a cheap mass-produced lens that they just stick on the camera so they can sell the camera, basically. A lot of the time they're a zoom lens, and they've got a variable aperture throughout the zoom range as well. So they might start off zoomed all the way out at f4, and then as soon as you zoom in, the aperture changes to like f6.3, which is really prohibitive when you're shooting pets, because you really need as much light as you can getting in through the lens. You need a nice big aperture.
And that would change if you're trying to shoot manual. That would change your exposure if your aperture is changing as you're going too.
Exactly. Yeah. So you end up with all kinds of problems. And those lenses, generally the optics just aren't as good. They're not super clear. They're not a great quality. They're not sharp. They don't focus very quickly.
Yep.
So generally when you're photographing dogs, you need the camera. As soon as you press that focus button, you need the camera to find focus and lock focus really quickly. And those lenses, they tend to hunt. They're not very accurate. So I would definitely recommend buying the camera body and then buying a lens separately, paying more for the lens than you would obviously with a kit lens that comes with the camera, but it's 100% worth it. And getting something with a fixed aperture all through the zoom range as well. So I always say that the most useful lens for pet photography is the 70 to 200 millimeter f2.8 lens.
I agree.
I think that's probably the most widely used lens for pet photography. And I think there's there's multiple really good reasons for that. I think the biggest thing is that it allows you to kind of hang back a little bit and gives you some flexibility to sort of zoom in, which is a really good way of shooting. I mean, you can get up close portraits and they're beautiful as well, but just that ability to be able to hang back, zoom in, and have the most amount of light getting in through the lens. To get your exposures good, keep your shutter speed high. So I think that's probably the most useful.
I agree that if I had to choose one lens that like I couldn't live without, it would definitely be my 70 to 200. There are, that one, well, back up for a second. One of the nice things about investing in lenses is generally once you get to those nicer lenses, they are an investment and they're going to last for a long time. Even if you are on a 7D camera body in Canon and you eventually want to get a 1DX or want to move up to a different camera, those lenses are still going to work. So, I mean, and heck, even switching over from the DSLR to the mirrorless, my lenses still work with the adapter. So, so they can be a long-term investment. But that even being said, Charlotte, what's your opinion? Because they have the 70 to 200 2.8. And I know some people opt to do the 70 to 200 4.0, which is fixed aperture. It's lighter because a lot of people think that 70 to 200 is a bit of a beast. It's pretty heavy.
Yep.
And it's lighter and it's less expensive, but you're losing that aperture. So for me, I shoot that lens at 2.8 pretty much constantly. So that's a deal breaker for me, but what's your recommendation for others?
Yeah, well, I guess it depends. Like if your budget just really can't stretch to the 2.8 version, the f4 version is definitely a good like stopgap solution, I suppose. They're definitely cheaper. As you said, they're lighter. It can be a little bit restrictive if you find, it sort of depends where you are in the world too, because if you find that you're shooting often in low light, so if you live somewhere very cloudy, you don't have a lot of sun to play with, having that extra stop of light is just so helpful. Also keep in mind that the f4 version of the lens, the actual optics, so the glass isn't quite as nice as the f2.8 version as well. So you're taking a little bit of a cut in quality as well. And also the responsiveness of the autofocus. So there's a few different areas where it's not quite as good. It's not just the aperture, but I mean, you've got to think about your budget too. Like that's pretty important for most people, especially when you're starting out. If you can spring for it, if you can stretch for it, I would definitely recommend the f2.8, but the f4 is going to be fine for you. And you probably will find the limits of it at some stage, and then you'll probably want to upgrade. Most people don't get the f4 version and then just kind of stick with it. Generally, if people can afford to upgrade, they will. So if you can skip that and just go straight to the f2.8, that's ideal. The other thing is too, and it's kind of one of those topics that is probably divides people a little bit, is which brand as well with the lenses. Because I personally, I have played around with Sigma lenses. I personally prefer the Canon brand lenses. I find that they work a lot better. They don't need any sort of micro adjustment in camera to get the focus exactly right. And I have come across people who have been using, say, Sigma or Tamron lenses at workshops who have been having problems with the focus and having problems trying to get that micro adjustment right, or having issues with the images just not being sharp and the glass just not being good enough. So again, generally it's often about your budget. That's all kind of what it comes back to. If you can spring for it, do try and get the Canon lens or the Nikon lens if you're on Nikon as well.
Yeah, they're just built to work with that body. I find the same from people that have had Sigma and Tamron, that they often do need to take it in and either calibrate it themselves, or they can take it to a camera shop that will help them do that.
Yeah.
And that does help them. I know some people that have a Sigma lens that once that was done, it worked beautifully and they loved it. But yeah, and I prefer just to, have all my gear and one brand. So that way, I just have one brand, one company to go to if I need something fixed or if something's not working right.
Yeah.
So you don't have, both companies pointing the other way. Like it's the lens's fault. It's the body's fault.
Yeah. That's a really good point, actually. Yeah.
Yeah. So that's a helpful thing.
Yeah.
For people that are, everybody always has some budgetary concerns. For used gear, like if you were starting off and you're like, all right, I can't afford the 7200 2.8. I'm going to start with the 4.0. Like one thing I would recommend is probably look for a used 70-200 4.0 that you can buy, you can use for a little bit, you can make a little bit of money, and then you can sell that and upgrade to the 2.8. So long as you are, really buying from, there's so many reputable resellers from camera shops to, resellers online of, actual companies like B&H or KEH or KEH, I think. But yeah, do you have the same recommendation?
I think so. Yeah, definitely. I mean, I myself have sold lenses and I know they're perfectly fine lenses and they're definitely a hell of a lot cheaper than buying them brand new and there's absolutely nothing wrong with them.
Yep.
So yeah, it's definitely an option if you can, like, you don't always need to buy new, I guess. You just do need to be a little bit careful about things, about where you buy them from, and do see if you can like fully properly inspect them first. Even ask if you can maybe test or see images from them as well.
Yeah.
Yeah. Sometimes people do have issues with lenses and that's why they sell them.
Yeah.
So
I find definitely the companies, because they'll stand behind it, or if you're buying from a person, if you're buying from someone that you know or you have friends in common with, or someone in a local group that that you can kind of check and that just to have some sort of connection, not like a random Joe Schmo on the internet that you have no connection to.
Yeah.
Because you do need to be careful for all the random scams and like selling your equipment where they're like, okay, I'll pay you this. And then, I'm going to be here. Can you send it here instead?
Yeah.
I had somebody I was trying to sell. Speaking of perfect gear, I have that, the Fuji telephoto is my only lens left. It's the 50-140, which is the 70-200 equivalent that I've used like 3 times.
Yeah.
So it is essentially new. Anyone out there in the US that wants that, let me know.
Is the ad, yeah.
But anyway, I was selling it in like Fuji gear. I had it up and somebody contacted me and they're like, oh yeah, I'll pay full price. And they started to send it to my PayPal, but it was like pending.
Yep.
Or I think I sent an invoice, but they never paid. And then they're like, okay, I sent it, send it now to this address. And I'm like, well, no, it hasn't gone through yet. And they're like, just got really pushy. And I Googled it. And then I looked at the address they sent, which was Miami, but the person who sent it to me lived in New York. And then I Googled that Miami address and it was total scam. I'm like, no chance.
Yeah.
So you've got to be really, really careful. And if you guys have any, inkling of a thought of like, this doesn't feel right, you can ask in the Hair of the Dog podcast community. Like a lot of us have been through these scams before or like gotten really close to getting ripped off. So we could be like, red flag, don't go through with that deal.
Yeah, definitely. Just steer clear. It's definitely, there's definitely a lot of traps to fall into and buying anything online secondhand. Yeah, it's crazy.
For sure.
Yeah, it's definitely a good option if you can't spring for the, brand new cost.
Yeah.
Yeah, when you're buying gear. Yeah.
I love it.
Another lens that I really recommend to people just starting out, and it's a lens that I got, and it's a lens that sort of when I was early on in my journey, and it's a lens that I felt really helped me improve, is a 50mm prime.
Oh,
so Nifty 50 generally refers to the super cheap f1.8 version. If you can go for like an f1.4 version, that's generally pretty good. It's not quite the Nifty 50, it's a slightly more expensive 50, but even then it's still pretty cheap compared to these.
Super affordable compared to like some of the others.
Definitely. And that f1.4 gives you a beautiful shallow depth of field. It forces you to be really accurate with your focusing. So it helps you improve your focusing because you've got such a shallow slice of focus. You have to be very accurate in what you focus on. There's not a lot of leeway for error. So it kind of forces you to improve your skills with focusing as well. So that's all really good for practicing. When I was first starting out and I was mostly photographing my own dogs, I used to just stick the Nifty 50 on, or the f1.4 version anyway, and go for a walk with my dogs or go to a park or go somewhere new and just shoot with that lens and just see what I could do just with that one lens, because it's actually very versatile. You can get some great close-ups, you can get some great wider shots. It's just a really good way of improving your skills, sticking with one fixed focus length. You learn to zoom with your feet, which when you're photographing dogs is basically zoom with your hands and knees.
Right.
Because you're pretty much on the ground most of the time when you're photographing dogs. But yeah, that would probably be my other recommendation for a lens. It also gives you a wider angle of view as well, especially when compared to the 70 to 200. So it just opens up from some different possibilities for shooting, and it's a really like budget conscious lens as well. I love the focal length of 50 on a full frame camera. It's a beautiful focal length. Actually, when I switched to mirrorless, that was one of the big things that prompted me to switch, was because Canon brought out a new RF 50mm f1.2 lens. And I was like, yes, I am getting that straight away. And I did, and I absolutely love it. It is.
Oh, you've inspired me to pull out my 50 more. I rarely use my 50.
Really? Which one do you have?
1.2.
1.2, yeah. So the one.
Yeah, it's a great lens. I find the focal length isn't my favorite, but I love what you said about just going out and like forcing yourself to use that focal length, or really any focal length. Yeah. Don't do it on a client session, but go out and just shoot and challenge yourself to say, how many different, how much different variety, how many different looks and views and just images can I create from this one lens?
Yep.
And it just forces you to start to see things a little bit differently and to get more creative.
Yep.
So it's a great thing. I think why I don't love that one as much as the others is because it is, they say the 50mm is like closest to what our human eye sees.
Yeah.
So I like having either a little bit more of the distortion of like 24 is like, if I had to only shoot with two lenses for the rest of my life, it would be my 24, 1.4 and my 70 to 200, 2.8.
Yeah, and right. Okay. Yeah, the two extremes, I guess. Yeah.
Yeah. It's either at 200 or at 24.
Yeah.
But mostly I would say 90% of the images that I love, that kind of speak to me and my style and like, feel like me in my portfolio, or at that 70 to 200 at 200, 2.8.
Yep.
With negative space.
Definitely. Yeah, definitely. Negative space, Nicole.
Negative space. That's me. That's what they call me at the park. Yeah. Good thing my name's not like Rachel.
Yeah, it wouldn't work.
No. That's funny. All right. One other question about our gear that kind of jumps back to mirrorless versus DSLR is we were talking about the difference in the focusing systems and things like that.
Yeah.
I haven't totally looked into it, but I think you might know a little bit more than me versus the R5 versus the R6. Is the only difference between those two really like the video and the file size?
Pretty much. Yeah, it's the same autofocus system.
Yeah, and it's a full frame. The R6 is full frame as well, right?
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep.
So, I mean, if I was looking for an entry-level camera, I think the R6 isn't that expensive compared to, I imagine it's about the same as like the, I haven't looked at the prices of them recently, of the 7D, but I think it's less than the 5D.
I think it's about the same. See, the way that they did the numbering with the mirrorless, I think R5 is meant to be the equivalent of like a 5D, and R6 is meant to be the equivalent of like a 6D, but with way better autofocus. So I think the pricing might be fairly similar as well.
Yeah.
I'm not sure. I'd have to look into that. But the R6 is definitely a really, really good option if you're wanting to jump straight into the mirrorless, I guess, framework, and you're wanting to jump straight into those mirrorless lenses, then why not get the R6? Like it's perfect, absolutely perfect for us as pet photographers. I think the number one thing that it would hold people back from the R6 is the resolution. So I think they're a 20 megapixel camera. So
what was the 5D? Is that the same as the 5D?
Yeah.
Was that 22 or something?
D is not 20. So that the 1DX is, I think, 20.
Yeah.
The 1DX, the actual original 1DX was 18. And I think the 1DX Mark II and maybe Mark III is like 20 megapixels. So even though
it was
1DX,
definitely at least 20. Yeah.
Yeah.
It was either 20 or 22. I can't remember.
So even the 1DX, which is like Canon's flagship DSLR, is still only 20. And I mean, I've been shooting with the 1DX cameras since I think 2013, and I do large printing, large size prints for clients, and I haven't really had too much of a problem with it. I think if you were going to go really massive, like 40 by 60 inches or something like that, you would probably want the extra resolution. But
I have a 40x60 acrylic right across from me that I shot with. Oh, I would have to look. No, that one would have been my 5D Mark III, and it is beautiful.
yeah. So I think the 5Ds are like 20, I'm going to say
22. I think when I upgraded to the 1DX, it was the same megapixels.
Really?
Yeah.
We
I
really
believe
need
so.
to be looking this up.
I know. We should. Stand by. All right. So we just took a pause to look up because Charlotte and I decided instead of just totally like guessing what these megapixels were in this conversation, we should probably look on Canon's site and give you guys an actual answer.
Yep.
So the R5 is 45 megapixels, which is crazy town. I was just telling Charlotte, I was shooting some action shots of a dog on a beach when I was in Florida a couple weeks ago. And I'm like, oh, wait, I think I want to make this vertical and zoom in a little bit. And I did that, and it was still the same size as my previous 5D Mark III
It's crazy.
like, final files. It was
Crazy.
nutty. But yeah, we were talking about blowing up for bigger resolution. So I had used my 5D Mark III for this big 40x60 acrylic, and it looks great. And the 5D Mark III was 22.3 megapixels.
Yeah.
The 5D Mark IV is 30.4, but the 1DX is 20.1. So that R6, comes in around that 1DX size, which is still plenty big enough really to do anything large with it, unless you're going to do a lot of cropping. If you're going to do a lot of cropping, then, you don't have a lot to work with.
Yeah, you do need to make sure that you're shooting to get your composition pretty much right in camera if you're planning to print big with a 20 megapixel camera, because you do not want to crop in too much and then enlarge it. Because that's how I start running into problems. But so my largest wall art size that I used to offer when I was shooting with my 1DX was 28 by 40 inches. And I would be absolutely fine with doing that. Even just using Photoshop to slightly res the image up a little bit if need be. And it just looks absolutely fine. So I think the R6 at 20 megapixels is perfectly fine. I don't think that should be something that would hold you back from getting it or make you think that you need the R5.
Right. Yeah. I mean, because some of the drawbacks of the R5 is just you need to make sure you have a computer that can handle the size of those files.
Yes.
Because it will use a bit more RAM than managing those smaller files, and it takes a little bit longer in Lightroom. I know I have a heart attack every time. I'm like, oh my God, these are all soft. Oh, it's because Lightroom takes a minute to get that much data.
That's right. Yeah. I even find that while I'm importing the images, I pretty much just have to, and I should do it anyway, but I pretty much just have to let it import the images, walk away from the computer.
Yeah.
Because when I try to use the computer when it's importing those really large files, it does tend to chug a little.
Yeah.
So you do need to sort of make sure that your computer can handle it as well. And you also need the latest version of Lightroom as well.
Yes, right.
Otherwise, you've got no support for the CR3 files from the R6 and the R5. But it definitely has support now. So, you just need to upgrade.
Yes. Yeah. And, you guys are going to find that because I, every once in a while, still talk to somebody that's like, oh, I'm still running CS6, which was, 3, 4, 5 years ago at this point that they had the CSs before they went to the cloud.
Yeah.
And holding on to those for a year or two is fine. But, if you're doing this as a hobbyist, that's cool. Hold on to that as long as you can. But, if we're doing this professionally, the amount of extra tools and better use of all those tools in the current versions versus when it was back at CS is night and day. And, I've got to hand it to Adobe that it is still really affordable. In all those years, they really haven't raised the price. It's like $10 a month for Lightroom and Photoshop. It's actually $120 a year.
Yeah.
And, which is, you would spend that much upgrading at least one of the programs every year anyway. So it's definitely affordable. And, anytime that new gear comes out, it always takes a minute or two for your editing software to catch up.
Yeah.
And, there is a workaround. So you can import them and change them to DNGs, right? Digital negative, right? DNG. Yeah.
That's what I did the first few shoots that I did with the R5. Yeah. Because I got the R5 so early, I was on a pre-order. And I think I was probably one of the first people in Australia to get the R5, which was so exciting.
Awesome.
But it also meant that there was no support in Lightroom. So I just converted them. I just got I think it's an actual little program from Canon that I downloaded that converts those CR3 files to DNG files.
Oh, nice.
And so I just did that for the first couple of shoots that I used it for. And then the support came in because I've always got the latest version of Lightroom because I've got the Creative Cloud subscription, and it was fine. So, yeah.
Yeah. Awesome. I love it. Oh, this has been such a good conversation. Before we wrap up, I don't know. I feel like we should do like one question. If you are trapped on a desert island and can only have one lens, although I think we probably would have, I know what we'll do.
Yeah.
How about a dream lens that you don't have and just feels like too much of a splurge that you're like, man, I would love to have that lens, but that just seems crazy. Do you have one of those? I have one I'm thinking of.
I do, or I did before I switched to Mirrorless. So how about you go first?
All right.
I
kind of drool over the 200 f2.
Oh, that's it. That's it.
Yeah, but I can't bring myself to spend $5,000 on a lens. I'm like, my 200 2.8, my 7200 2.8 is fine.
Yeah, that's true.
And that sucker looks like a beast. It looks really, really big and heavy.
It looks amazing. And I think it's specifically designed, it's like a sports lens. It's designed for, really fast autofocus.
Right.
So it'd be just incredible for action shots. I do know some people who have it. And yes, incredible lens jealousy. But now that I've moved to, I don't know, you never know. Canon might bring out like an RF version. That's cheaper, but it won't be because all of the RF lenses are kind of expensive.
Yeah. They might come down later once the technology is more mainstream for them, I guess, maybe. But
I think so, yeah. Do you think we needed to talk about animal autofocus at all? Do you think people...
Oh, yes, we should. Yes, we should continue.
That's one of the number one things that I get asked about with the R5. Yes. So it's probably worth mentioning.
Yeah, no, 100%. So let's talk about that.
Okay.
I know for me, I'll share what I kind of do, and then I would love to hear what you do.
Cool.
I've only shot with my camera, a couple times with Zoe in the backyard, and then I took it with me to a client session. I took my 1DX, and I'm like, well, I'll take this and maybe play with it a little bit. And I ended up using it for the whole session. I'm like, whatever. What are you? A 1DX? See you later. I figured I better take it in case I get to a point where I'm like, wait, I'm not sure what. Because the new camera, sometimes you're like, well, wait, what's this setting? How do I find that other setting? No, I need to change this. But anyway, so I have found that the animal eye focus works really, really, really amazingly well. But I have that whole control enthusiasm problem. So I have found that I still really enjoy having a single point focus that I choose where it is and shooting back button focus for the portraits. But then switching it to animal eye focus for action, because then it's just one less thing to kind of think about, and it did an amazing job.
Okay. All right. That's interesting. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, the reason that I really like my control enthusiasm of choosing my focal point for portraits is when I'm shooting two dogs or a dog and an owner, I like to have my focal point on the dog's eye for one, and then move to the other subject for a couple shots too. So I'm pulling in a couple shots with knowing that my focus is tack sharp on both of them in case my depth of field was a little shallow and they want a big print and I need to merge images.
Yeah.
Where if I was letting the camera choose, I found it was just picking one and getting that one. And I'm like, oh, no. I need my backup, security blanket.
Yeah. So do you have, when you're using animal autofocus, do you have it set to start off with a single focus point that you can put on whichever subject you want, or is it just select?
Oh, no, it was selecting all. I didn't think I could find that one. I thought I tried and it looked like it was basically autofocus with the animal eye.
So that was one thing that I changed really early on with the camera. So I think generally it comes standard with when you put it into the animal autofocus or the face detection. It will just choose whatever it thinks in the scene that it wants to focus on. So if you've got multiple subjects, it's like, oh, which one is it going to choose? What you can do, there is a setting that maybe we can put in the notes or something like that you can actually set it to start off with a single focus point that you can place wherever you want it in the scene. And then you put that focus point, start focusing, and an animal eye or face detection, eye detection focuses starting on that point. So if you've got multiple subjects, you can put the little square on that and then take a few shots with it on that. And then you can either move that focus point over or just reframe and then put that point on the other subject in there.
Yep. Okay.
So that's a really good way of, it's kind of a best of both worlds sort of thing.
Yeah. I might have to test that out.
So it gives you that more control. So you can still be a control enthusiast. But it also has the benefits of that animal autofocus as well, which is really cool.
Yeah. Do you still have that set on back button focus?
Yeah, I find it just, it's more intuitive to me. And I've been using back button focus for so long. It just makes sense to me to just use my thumb for the focus and my finger for taking the photo. I did play around with it because I thought switching to using animal autofocus most of the time, there isn't really a lot of advantage in using back button focus. So not the same advantage than if you were moving that point around and having to recompose and stuff like that. So I think it just totally boils down to personal preference and what you're used to and what makes sense from like a dexterity point, I guess, of your fingers and muscle memory and stuff like that. I think if you were using back button focus before, like me, you probably might decide to just keep on using it. If you've never used back button focus, then there's probably no reason to start using it. Because it works pretty much exactly the same, I found.
The one thing that I love back button focus for is if I'm taking a picture of a dog and the owner's holding them and I'm going to want to take like a back plate of the image. So I take the picture of the dog with the owner, but I want to take just an image to like basically paint the owner out. I love having the back button focus for that because then they can just get out of the way and I just hit the shutter again. And if I had that focus point attached to the shutter, of course, it's going to focus then on the background because there's no subject left in the image anymore. And then, you don't have that shallow depth of field to bring them together. That's one reason I like back button focus forever and ever and amen.
Nice. Yeah, I do know some people who, instead of using the back button focus as back button focus, they have it set up to stop focus or lock focus. So it's kind of like a reverse. It switches them. So you can still use the shutter button for focus and taking the photo. And if you want to lock the focus and not have it refocus when you go to take the picture, you can use that same back button to stop it focusing.
Nice. I never thought about that. Yeah.
So there's different ways you can set it up, I guess, depending on what makes sense to you and stuff. See, that's the thing. Like there's no right and wrong way to do things, I think, especially because cameras are so customizable now. I mean, whatever you can think up, you can pretty much do because you can customize everything. So, really good to keep that in mind, especially with the really new cameras. They're just so customizable. It's awesome.
Yeah. No, let's see. Some of the things I can remember off the top of my head that I customized is I always hold it and I'm like, okay, which button makes the most sense for my thumb? I've got like man hands. So, some people might want one closer, but I need one over a little bit because otherwise I'm like barely holding onto the camera.
Oh, so did you say ham hands?
What's that?
What did you call your hands? Ham hands.
Man hands.
Oh, man hands.
Man hands. My husband and I have the same size wedding ring, and my brother's is actually smaller, and he's like 6'2".
Oh my gosh, that's amazing!
Yes, and my rings, like you could give me $1 million right now and tell me to get my wedding rings off my finger without dipping my hand in a whole bunch of ice and like then putting soap on my finger, and I couldn't do it. There's no chance.
Wow. Oh my goodness. So you basically have no problem reaching buttons, but you want to select the most comfortable button for your hand, for your finger.
Exactly. Exactly. Yep. So I did that and I figured out which button to focus on. And then it's so funny because it becomes such a just muscle memory of shooting. Like someone always asks me, which button do you press for this? I'm like, I don't know. Let me hold your camera. Okay, this one. If you made me look at my camera and tell me which button I push without holding it, I'd be like, it might be that one. Or is it that one? I don't know. But the other custom thing I did was I took off because to move the focus point around, you had to press a button first and then move it. So I changed it. So if I just move that joystick, then I can just move my focal point without having to press anything first. Cause I move my focal point a lot.
Yep, that's true. Oh, and actually, do you know something else? And a funny story. So, sorry, this is turning into quite a long thing, but
No, people love it. It's all good. It's all good. The one of me and Kaylee was the longest so far, which is really no surprise.
I can imagine. Yeah, that totally makes sense to me. Anyway. Yeah, so funny story. One of the first shoots that I did with the R5, I shoot the dogs for a calendar for a rescue organization every year. I've been doing it for like the last 7 years or something. And basically we just do an afternoon of shoots and there's like 4 dogs that turn up. So it was the last, and I always make sure it ends up right on sunset. We're at the seaside. It was beautiful twilight. There was beautiful colors in the sky. And I had this dog who had previously been crazy and running around all over the place, just went for this massive swim to the point where we thought he might not even come back to shore. Like he was gone. He was gone. Anyway, he came back. He was exhausted, which was awesome because it meant he stayed in the one place for more than 2 seconds. Anyway, he was sitting there on the sand, beautiful twilight. There was a jetty. And I was trying to get this photo. And I'm like, where the hell has my focus point gone? Like, I was trying to focus. I was trying to see where the focus point was. And the problem is when you're looking at the LCD screen on the back, or even when you're looking through the viewfinder, there's so many little icons all around the edges of the screen. And this focus point was sitting directly over a letter on an icon to make it, and the focus point actually looked like part of the icon.
Right.
So I didn't see it there. And I'm like, my focus point has vanished. I was turning the camera on and off. I was like, that's it. It's broken. There's something wrong with it. It's broken. I can't get this final shot that I really wanted. I was like devastated. Anyway, so I had an assistant there who's actually a good photographer friend of mine. And she uses Sony mirrorless cameras as well as her Canon. And she came over and she's like, you sure that's not it just there? And I'm like, oh my gosh, that's where it is. And anyway, I moved it down. I'm like, oh my gosh, my focus point, it's back. Yes. So I legit lost my focus point because it got, right over in the corner on the edge. Anyway,
that's funny.
I decided that I needed a quick way of getting this focus point back to the middle. And I did my research and looked in the advanced manual, and I found out that if you press that, so this was something that wasn't on the 1DX, you couldn't actually click that little toggle on the back that you use to put focus points on, but on the R5 you can. And what it does is it centers the focus point back into the middle. So if you lose the focus point, if it goes off onto one side and it's like, and because the focus points have such tiny little increments, it actually is quite a few clicks to get it back into the middle if it's on the edges. So I found out that by pressing this little toggle right in the middle, bang, centers the focus point.
Oh, good to know.
Mind blown. It was amazing.
Yeah, I love it. Those are the fun little tricks that, you like are, getting a little stressed out at the session at the moment. And you're like, oh, well, there it is. Okay.
Yeah. Yeah. It was seriously a moment of panic. But
yeah. So for moving from like DSLR to mirrorless, what have been some of the, not challenging per se, but just, some of the things that took a little bit more getting used to, because it is a switch. Even staying in the Canon system, there were still little things that just took me a little getting used to with making the switch.
Yeah, definitely. I think one of the biggest things that I've been trying to get used to and incorporate into the way that I shoot is the flippy screen. So I've never had a camera that's had a flip out screen other than the Fuji, I guess, which was quite good.
Yeah.
And so I really love the idea of, as you get older, your knees start playing up a little bit and things get a bit sore. You don't want to be on the ground all the time. So one of the big advantages that I thought would be the flip out screen, because you can hold the camera right down on the ground. And I have loved playing around with that and deciding to incorporate that into my shooting. But I found the challenging thing with that, if you're shooting the dog and the dog is quite close to the camera, so it's fine if they're in a distance and you zoomed in quite a long way, but the line of sight is generally towards your face. Mm-hmm. And if the camera is down on the ground and your face is, off the ground, it actually, the dog isn't looking at the camera. The dog is looking at you. The dog is actually looking up.
Right.
So you have to be really careful to make sure that their line of sight is following something that's on the ground. So you definitely need to lure their gaze down. And I found it especially with my dogs, and I didn't realize before how much they look at my face. So even though I hold the camera up to my face, they're still looking at my face, which makes it look like they're looking at the camera. As soon as I take the camera away, they're still looking at my face. So I had to work really hard to either stick my face down there anyway, which kind of defeats the point of
Right.
Being able to hold the camera down or actually make sure that they're looking at something else. So looking at a treat or looking at a toy or a crunchy leaf or a stick or something that I then also hold down at camera level so they're looking at the camera. Right. They're not looking up. Because I have so many photos of when I was playing around with my own dogs when I first got the camera of them looking up because I'm holding the camera down. Yeah, so that was probably one of the biggest things that is both it's both an advantage, so it's a good thing, and also something that I had to really tweak to get working for me. But now that I have tweaked it, it's amazing. It's probably one of the biggest things that I like about having a new R5.
Yeah. I started playing with using that flip out screen for shooting blind for like the dog walking towards me and like me walking and shooting backwards.
Yeah.
So much easier. And I was playing a little bit too of just, testing the automatic like animal eye focus for that, or like hitting the screen because you can touch the screen to say, oh, I want my focus here. And I found that the animal eye tracking was working easier for me, at least. Some people might find it easier to tap the screen, but moving and holding and there was too much going on. But so that's worked out fairly well and been pretty fun to play with. I would say the biggest challenge getting used to, the biggest change for me switching was that since it's that electronic viewfinder, like it feels weird, when you look through, you see your exposure, number one, but then also like you look through and it's, when you move it, it just takes a minute for the like the world to regroup, because there's, it's like when you're in LED light and you're like moving your hands, you're like, there's a tracer. So it's like you're looking at it, you're moving over in your camera and you're like, whoa, what's going on? Because you're used to seeing like the actual light moving from a mirror, like a normal view.
An actual view of it to like a reconstructed perceived view of it. And it's just a tiny little bit different. Yeah.
It was just weird. It still works great. It's just one of those weird little things. You're like, oh, this is a little odd.
Yeah. I do, however, love the fact that you get an actual preview of the exposure through the viewfinder or on the back of the camera as you're shooting. Because it's such a good way. I mean, I've been shooting in manual for forever.
Right.
And so I'm very used to having to change my exposure settings when the light changes or whatever. But being able to actually see that happening through the viewfinder, that was another thing that I really, really love.
Agreed, because I have been guilty on more than one occasion, even recently at like a random session, you go from one area and then you go to a new area and like the dog's doing something cute and you start shooting, you're like, oh, the light's totally different here and I totally forgot to change my settings. And I didn't notice because you're looking, at them through the viewfinder that's just the mirror, you're seeing normal light.
You don't get that instant feedback.
Yeah, you're like, oh, look, it's a little dark, or you're totally overexposed here. Oh, right, I need to change because I'm in a new spot.
Yeah, it's a good little reminder. Actually, for people who are like at the beginning stages of shooting in manual, that would be amazing. That would be such an amazing feature to have in a camera, because it really, really helps you. Especially when you need the reminder to change your exposure when you move into different lighting. So definitely a good thing. Just backtracking a little bit, we were talking about using the animal autofocus in different situations, and you said that you prefer to use that single point because it gives you a bit more control, but you love shooting action with the animal autofocus.
Yep.
So I just wanted to share my experiences with that as well. So I've done like 5 or 6 client shoots with the R5 now, and a couple of those shoots I've shot quite a lot of action at the beach, which is awesome fun, and I love doing it. It's like my favorite place to shoot action. I did find, and I think I have a theory, and I can't find anything concrete on it, but I have a theory that the animal autofocus actually works by detecting catch lights in eyes. The eye autofocus anyway, because it does recognize the general shape of the animal and it recognizes a face and a head. But when the subject is closer, it then switches to recognizing actual eyes. And I think it looks for catch lights. And the reason I think this is because one shoot that I had was with a black dog at the beach, and it was in the water. It was quite wet. It was a very shiny black dog. It was full sun, so very high contrast light. And I found that the animal autofocus didn't work quite so well on this dog when I was shooting it in full sun when it was wet. Because I think it was looking for catch lights.
And then the whole scene's catch lights between the water and the fur and oh my God.
Exactly. Wet black dog just looks like a whole bunch of catch lights. So I was getting a lot more missed focus. Interestingly enough, when I turned around and shot in the other direction and shot with backlight, obviously the front of the dog you're shooting with backlight is just then generally lit by ambient light, which is the shade, which is a much less which is a lower contrast light. So there wasn't all these bright highlights over the front of the dog, and the catch lights I think stood out more to the camera. And the camera actually had a higher percentage of keepers and a higher percentage of in-focus shots when I was shooting with backlight, which is interesting because that's the opposite of what I would expect with my 1DX. Right. Generally, 1DX was like, bam, absolutely perfect with a single point focus, shooting a full sun subject because there's lots of contrast, it locks onto it, whereas backlight is a little bit more challenging for that. But yeah, with the R5, with the animal autofocus, it was switched. So I had a lot more keepers shooting with backlight because the catch lights in the eyes, I think, were clearer. I haven't found any actual evidence or technical information online that supports this. This is just my own experience.
Yes,
but I'm pretty confident this is actually true. So in situations where you're photographing a really high contrast subject, especially if it's like a wet dog, for example, especially a dark colored wet dog, you may be better switching to a single point focus and just make sure you keep that focus point on the eyes, on the face, and not letting the camera try and detect the eyes or detect the face. But yeah, anyway, there's a little hot tip.
And what are the signs that it's missing? It's just you're getting some out of focus, or it's just searching, like it's going back and forth. Your lens is like, oh, here and there.
So it doesn't search as such. It's just, so say you're shooting an action sequence at 12 frames a second and you've held the shutter for like a couple of seconds and you've got like 20, 30 shots or whatever. So instead of each shot as the dog moves towards you or runs towards you being pretty well perfectly in focus, you will get like eyes in focus, chest in focus, eyes in focus.
So it's moving back and forth from all the shoots. It's moving sometimes to different spots on the dog.
Yeah, it's almost like it can't decide where the eyes are. And so it's just kind of looking for the eyes. It's still keeping, like I found that what I did was actually just increase depth of field. So instead of shooting at f2.8, I switched it to f4. And it was generally enough to account for that slightly missed focus. And so I didn't, I wasn't having to like throw a bunch of shots away in that case when I increased the depth of field. But yeah, the first time that I did it, I definitely noticed it was really inconsistent. Instead of keeping the eyes in focus the whole time, it would kind of, I guess, search a little bit back and forth. So it's something I'm still definitely experimenting with and playing around with. The other situation I find that the eye detection autofocus struggles with a little is when you're shooting with a very shallow depth of field and the subject's face is pretty much filling the frame. So they shoot with my 50mm at f1.2, which is a super shallow slice of field, like depth of field. If that focus is even slightly off, you notice it. So, I mean, it can be to the point where like the eyelash is in focus and the eyeball isn't in focus. Yeah. So it's not forgiving at all of misfocus. And I found that the eye focus is not quite as good as it can be as if you just use that single point of focus when they're kind of filling the frame. When you're like the whole dog is in the frame or when they're in the distance a little bit, it's absolutely perfect, bang on, always gets the eyes in focus. It's amazing. But up super close like that with a shallow depth of field, you do notice a little bit of not quite perfect focus. So yeah, they're probably the two situations I would watch out for. Awesome. Because any system isn't perfect. Right. Like it's never going to be perfect. And you know that because they're always bringing out updates, firmware updates and things like that, which is kind of an admission that like, okay, maybe it wasn't perfect before, but here, have a try of this.
We updated it.
Which is better. Awesome. I love the way they update things.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh, this has been just a wealth of knowledge on all things gear and shooting, and hope you guys have enjoyed our little peek into the adventures of Nicole and Charlotte shooting misadventures sometimes. But yeah, thanks again for being with us. And Charlotte, of course they can find you in the Hair of the Dog podcast community and in the Hair of the Dog Academy and Elevate, but where else can they find you again, just in case people want to learn more from you as well?
Cool. So obviously I've got like my pet photography business website. So that's just charlottereeves.com.au. And I've also got my learning website, which is learnpetphotography.com. So you can just go there. Everything is there for you. I've got a free daily tips series that you can sign up for, and you get a new email every day with a pet photography tip for 90 days.
Wow.
So that's a really good way to kind of dip your toe into the water of pet photography, the ocean of pet photography.
I love it. You start off in a stream, and by the end, you're like, oh, I'm going for a swim in the ocean. This is awesome.
That's it. Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Perfect.
So, it'd be awesome. You could book me up there.
Nice. Thanks again for being here with us, Charlotte, and everybody else. I will see you guys next week. Have a good one, and talk to you later. Bye, everybody.
Thank you. Bye.
Thanks for listening to this episode of Hair of the Dog podcast. If you enjoyed this show, please take a minute to leave a review. And while you're there, don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss our upcoming episodes. One last thing, if you are ready to dive into more resources, head over to our website at www.hairofthedogacademy.com. Thanks for being a part of this pet photography community.